The memories you hold and carry are part of what forms you spiritually, and Casey Tygrett will guide you in bringing your memories to God for spiritual transformation. We'll see an example in the Bible of how God will use whatever necessary to get through to us, and Felix Antoine Hamel was an aspiring politician, and the way he made Canadian history is electing him into the Hall of Heroes, coming up on episode 81 of Manly with Andy. Now joining the podcast, it's Casey Tygrett. His book is called The Practice of Remembering. Casey, I like to start here. What do you think is the biggest challenge that men face today, and how do we overcome it?
I'm glad you started with an easy question. Thanks for starting me out, man. I hesitate to answer for all of men. I can answer for myself, and I think what I'm hoping and trying to learn how to do is to kind of redefine what it means to be a man who is a person of faith, and trying to investigate kind of the stereotypes and pictures and images I've been handed that have been woven into me from my childhood or from media or whatever. Revisit those and interrogate those, be honest about how much of an impact they've had. And then also, some of us just embracing the parts of us that don't fit those things. And I think what will eventually come out of this, hopefully for me, but hopefully for all of us, is a new way of defining what does it mean to be a male? What does it mean to be a man who carries this desire and this passion to follow Jesus and to do it well, to become like him?
It sounds like there's a book there, hopefully, in the future.
Maybe. Can't wait for you to write it.
That's your book, man. No, I just read books and interview authors. I am not an author myself. I'll leave that to the experts. I talk. I get paid to talk for a living. That's about it. Well, and I love that you said that, because I think we're going to dig deeper into that about memories and the things that we just have pre-programmed in our brains that we think that we need to go with, the script. But I want to start at the beginning of your book and just talking about memories. And I just thought it was a great metaphor for your book, as you write in the beginning, that you compare our memories to shells that we gather on the beach. Why is that?
For me, it was a metaphor that made sense as I was trying to think about how do I talk about what I'm thinking here. And I think the idea of shells, my family, we've always enjoyed walking beaches, collecting shells, and you're always doing a bit of sorting the whole time. So you're picking one up, and it may not be the most perfect shaped one, but you take it anyway because there's something about it that just stands out to you, whether it's color or whether it's what's attached to it. And our life is the same way. We go through life using our senses: smell, taste, sight, touch, sound, and we gather these experiences, things that we see, feel, hear, taste, and our brain begins to archive those things, and some of them keep forever. Smell is one of those things that I found out as I was studying a little bit of neuroscience. Now, caveat, I am the least likely and least qualified person to talk about neuroscience. But the stuff that I read talked about how there's no short-term memory for smell. And so you smell something for the first time, it stays with you for the rest of your life, which is great if it's a good smell, obviously. If it's a terrible smell, then you're just stuck with it. You're stuck with it forever. So we take all those things in and we collect them. And I have upstairs on my bookshelf this collection of shells from years of travels. And every time I look at it, it takes me back to different places where we've been. And our experiences are the same way. They become these memories, these stories we tell about the time we went and there was a storm, or the time we went and we were going through a job transition and we were walking the beach trying to figure out what happened next. And our memories are the same way. We archive them and they become these stories we tell ourselves. And then those stories become scripts. They become challenges and walking instructions for how we live our life, whether that's a life of faith, whether that's in our relationships, whether that's in the way that we see ourselves. We carry those stories out as scripts and say, this is what we're going to do with our life. This is how we're going to respond to certain stimulus. This is how we're going to engage with the world around us. And so I felt like that image made sense, and I feel like it captures the idea of gathering these things, no matter what they are, carrying them with us, and then they have a place in our life in the future.
So you mentioned scripts there a little bit, and you have a part of your book talking about that we are people with a script and how that affects us. Because I think a lot of us will have scripts that we believe that aren't true, One of the things that I hear a lot, Casey, from men that I talk with is we talk a lot about identity now too. And I know we kind of touched on that a little bit at the beginning, but talk about that, the scripts that we've been handed, maybe that we've accepted and maybe we shouldn't have. And how do we flip that script? How do we go to the spiritual script that God's given us?
Well, it's not easy. I can say that first and foremost, because those things are wired so deeply into us, especially if they're things we've heard early and often. So if there's a story that we've heard by the way that our parents treated us, for example, or didn't treat us, if there's a story of abandonment that we've carried since we were children, that becomes a script that we become protective because we believe everyone will abandon us. If these people did, then why won't this person or this next person? And so we become protective, we become emotionally insulated. And the way that affects our faith is it's difficult for us to see God as anything other than this life with God is this exchange of good for good, because we don't want God to abandon us. We don't think God will abandon us, but we definitely don't want to do anything to jeopardize that. So there's this achievement-oriented thing that comes along with that. I think sometimes it takes crisis and pain. Most of the people that I walk with as a spiritual director, when they experience change, it's usually because of pain. Or when they confront their script, it's usually because they've run into the wall of reality and they've realized the script isn't working anymore. Or they've met a person who lives by a different script and they're like, hey, wait a minute, hang on, why don't you have the same junk that I do? And how did you get into that? And so a spiritual director is a helpful person to help stand outside of that script and sort of point it out to us and show us how those things are affecting us over time. I think pain is one of the things that brings us into contact with that. I also think age and stage. There are things I've confronted now in my 40s that I just wasn't ready to confront in my 20s, or things I interrogated about my own parents that now I can do as a father. About my own father, now that I'm a father, there's just a different perspective that I have. And I think God steps into that through the Spirit and begins to speak to us and say, do you see what was going on there? Here's what you thought was happening. Here's what might have actually been happening. And it doesn't make it all better, but it gives us a different lens. So with a different lens, we can start thinking about a different script and say, I don't have to live by that same script that I was given. Challenge is sometimes that script is a script we have about God. And if we've been taught that God is munching Tums up in heaven just tolerating us, that's a hard script to get out from under, and it will shape how we live and what we believe. It'll shape how we read the Bible. We'll bring that to Scripture, and that's the lens that we'll read everything through. So we'll look at wrath and we'll look at violence in the Bible and we'll be like, well, of course. That's just who God is. And eventually that script is unlivable. And we need people to step into the gap with us and help us figure out, how do I find a new script that makes sense of my memories, but also is able to move beyond them, redeem them, renew them.
There's things in my past I don't want to remember, and I think we all have these things, Casey, and they usually come into my mind as I'm trying to sleep. I'll stare up at my ceiling, and I'll relive these experiences over and over again, and I try to change the outcome in my mind. I think if I would have said this, if I would have done this, if I wouldn't have gone here. What do we do with those memories so they don't haunt us?
Well, especially as you talked about for yourself, I wonder what would happen if you just embraced that situation rather than looking at it as something that you'd like to be. We would all like those stories to be different, but fully embracing it and just calling it what it is. That's usually the first step in a healthy way of approaching our memories. Because the more we hold it at a distance, the more we try to edit it, the more we try to forget about it, it grants that memory more power. I think specifically about Peter in John, and the story of Peter and John at the end, after the betrayal, after Jesus' crucifixion, is so powerful because there's this moment where Peter betrays the person he loved the most, that he dedicated himself to follow, that he self-proclaimed, I'd do anything. I'd never turn my back on you, and then he does it. And when Jesus meets him, I notice that he doesn't say, tell me what you did. He doesn't ask him to confess. He doesn't really even ask him to repent. He just asks him, so going forward, do you love me? Like this thing was a thing. The whole cockroach, I told you it was going to happen, frankly. But this thing happened. So now, with light of that, do you love me? And I think it's such a powerful way for Peter to see that memory and then begin to move beyond it and say, yeah, that happened. We're not going to pretend it didn't. What we're going to say is, what happens now? Since that was the case, where do we go from here?
In the chapter, Remembering Who We Are, you write this beautiful line, and I'll read it. Freedom begins when God finds us in the midst of normalcy and orients our vision towards a fracture, a crack in the beauty that needs our attention.
It's weird to hear lines that you've written.
like, that was good.
I think one of the things that has been so important to me is paying attention to stuff that isn't miraculous, that isn't exceptional, that isn't the big flashing lights, angels descending from on high to the shepherds in the fields, but those things that are more commonplace and normal that can point us towards cracks, things that we've been, just little tiny things that happen every day that can be just signals and signs and semaphores that God uses to say, here's something we should talk about. Here's something that's hanging around in your gray matter that's flying through your neural pathways. Let's talk about that. And to see it not with guilt or shame, to see it not as a threat, like we need to talk about this. There's that difference in language, like let's talk about this, or we need to talk. That's a whole different thing.
Yes.
If your wife comes to you and it's like, let's talk about this, you're like, oh, and if there's like a we need to talk, it's like, oh, this is not good. So I see more God meeting us in these just very normal moments and saying, do you see where that's headed? Let's spend some time with that. Because most of the time when we get to those big explosive, flashing light kind of moments, it's such a high emotional time that it's hard for us to either be objective or be thoughtful or stay present with God. It's more learning how to do it in the everyday, in the normal things. When I'm sitting on my porch, in the yard, in the late fall, and there's a fire going in the fire pit, and I just see a spark go up. And, I hear God say, hey, let's talk about that spark. Where's your temperature at lately? And when was it higher than it is now? And it's not a condemning kind of thing. It's just, let's pay attention to this. And I think that's a lot of where that line is going.
So in a book about remembering, it is interesting that you talk about the importance of being in the here and now, and you kind of mentioned that with the spark. It's so easy to be caught up in focusing on our past. So how do we make sure that we are in the here and now, and how does that help us with the art of remembering?
The one thing that's important about it is, the primary thing is to realize that everything that's happening now, the experiences we're having, the place where we are, the stuff that we're carrying is keyed into the things that have happened before. So there's not really a disconnect from this present moment to the ones that came before it. And that can do a lot of things. Sometimes that's a very comforting thing. So having an explanation for how we got here, so it's like, okay, well, this is how we got to this point. That's good. At least I know where we came from. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it creates a restlessness in us because we're like, I want to go back to the moments before this one and either do something different like you mentioned before, or it was a better time then than it is now. And so the present moment shows us this is what it was, and we have to reckon with how we got here and what that means to us, but also thinking about where are we headed now, what happens next. We may not have an answer for that. So being able to stay in the present moment, on a Tuesday morning in the Midwest, just as we are, and allow God to say, there are things that have brought you to this point, and there are things that are going to happen next. But all of it is contingent on the shells that you're gathering, the memories, the experiences that you're creating right here and right now. And one of the ways, obviously technology is a huge thing that keeps us out of the present moment, I think maybe more than anything else. I also think just the things that we give our minds to, our minds are so powerful. If we just let our mind run with something, it can take us right out of the present moment. And certain personality types are worse at that. Mine is one of them. Like, I am very much let's think about what's going to happen next, and let's navel gaze for a while about what, all my own feelings about this. And so it's easy to be sitting on a couch with someone, with my daughter, for example, and just be there but not be there. And so bringing the memories of times when I was there but not there, and also the times when I really got ahead of myself and say, I have this moment right now. And that's where, talking earlier about how pain changes us, it only takes a few people, and I think as much of my life has been as a pastor, and I've been able to sit on the front row of this, to see someone die at an untimely moment, you begin to reckon with your present tense really fast. When you think about this person left the house and never came back, and they didn't plan on that. They didn't plan on that. Now, I'm not getting into the whole eternity discussion and what was their status with God. I'm not talking about any of that. I'm talking about with the family they have and the people they love and the life that they're in the midst of. They didn't expect to leave that. So the certainty of coming back home is not there. So while I'm here, I need to remember what it felt like to watch that wife, that mother, go through the loss and realize I have this moment to be with my daughter. I can doom scroll later, and probably will,
Yep.
It's going to happen, but not now. Now is a moment for me to remember what it means to stay present and let God do what God is going to do in the midst of that. I mean, there's always we never do any of that unaccompanied.
So talk about the power of future memories.
That's kind of where I was headed with the last comment. It is cultivating a memory that you can tap into later in the future. That's really the basis of wisdom, is future memories. It's being able to think of something, bring something to mind that has happened before, and know that it'll happen again. In the book, I wrote 2 chapters on Revelation, and trust me, after it was over, I was like, why did you decide to do that? Maybe leave that book alone. I don't know. Yeah. But how much of Revelation is talking to people in a very drastic present tense and tapping into memories they have of a time when they're like, hey, just remember, Babylon always falls. Always. Every oppressive empire that puts itself up against God. And you can take that as literally as you want, or you could take that as metaphorically, spiritually as you want. Everything that presses you down, that goes in the face of God, will fall. And so just carry that with you. Let that be your encouragement. So those future memories are the things that we put up against the thing that we're facing in the moment. Times when we're struggling financially and we know that something happened that we weren't prepared for. Resources came from nowhere and we can trust in that. Or times when we feel like we're over our head. I know for a lot of people since 2020, we felt like we were over our heads. And yet God met us, Spirit met us in the midst of that and shaped us through it. So whatever comes next, the bar has already been set. And so we can tap into that future memory and say, okay, I can face what's coming up next with resiliency and kindness and grace because I know what's come before. So that's really the value of the power of that future memory. I love that concept too. I've kept that with me ever since the book was written.
Now taking a look in the Bible, this is in Numbers 22. The people of Israel traveled to the plains of Moab and camped east of the Jordan River, across from Jericho. Balak, son of Zippor, the Moabite king, had seen everything the Israelites had done to the Amorites, and when the people of Moab saw how many Israelites there were, they were terrified. The king of Moab said to the elders of Midian, "This mob will devour everything in sight, like an ox devours grass in the field." So Balak, king of Moab, sent messengers to call Balaam, son of Beor, who was living in his native land of Pethor. "Look, a vast horde of people has arrived from Egypt. They cover the face of the earth and are threatening me. Please come and curse these people for me because they are too powerful for me. Then perhaps I will be able to conquer them and drive them from the land. I know that blessings fall on any people you bless, and curses fall on people you curse." Balak's messengers, who were elders of Moab and Midian, sent out with money to pay Balaam to place a curse upon Israel. They went to Balaam and delivered Balak's message to him. "Stay here overnight," Balaam said. "In the morning I will tell you whatever the Lord directs me to say." So the officials from Moab stayed there with Balaam. That night, God came to Balaam and asked him, "Who are these men visiting you?" So then Balaam explains what he was told, and then God says, "Don't go with them. You are not to curse these people, for they have been blessed." The next morning, Balaam gets up and tells the officials, "Go on home. The Lord will not let me go with you." The officials go back to King Balak, And they say, Balaam's refused to come with us. Balak tries again. This time he sends even more people, more distinguished officials. And they say, this is what Balak, son of Zippor, says. Please don't let anything stop you from coming to me. I will pay you very well and do whatever you tell me. Just come and curse these people for me. But Balaam responded to Balak's messengers, even if Balak were to give me his palace filled with silver and gold, I would be powerless to do anything against the will of the Lord my God. But stay here one more night, and I'll see if the Lord has anything else to say to me. So God comes to Balaam again and then says, since they've come again, get up and go with them, but do only what I tell you to do. So then Balaam gets up, saddles his donkey, starts off with the Moabite officials. But God was angry that Balaam was going, so he sent the angel of the Lord to stand in the road to block his way. As Balaam and his 2 servants were riding along, Balaam's donkey saw the angel of the Lord standing in the road with a drawn sword in his hand. The donkey bolted off the road into a field, but Balaam beat it and turned it back onto the road. Then the angel of the Lord stood at a place where the road narrowed between 2 vineyard walls. When the donkey saw the angel of the Lord, it tried to squeeze by and crushed Balaam's foot against the wall. So Balaam beat the donkey again. Then the angel of the Lord moved further down the road and stood in a place too narrow for the donkey to get by at all. This time, when the donkey saw the angel, it laid down under Balaam. In a fit of rage, Balaam beat the animal again with his staff. Then the Lord gave the donkey ability to speak. What have I done to you that deserves your beating me 3 times? It asked Balaam. You've made me look like a fool, Balaam shouted. If I had a sword with me, I'd kill you. But I'm the same donkey you've ridden all your life, the donkey answered. Have I ever done anything like this before? No, Balaam admitted. Then the Lord opened Balaam's eyes, and he saw the angel of the Lord standing in the roadway with a drawn sword in his hand. Balaam bowed his head and fell face down on the ground before him. Why did you beat your donkey those 3 times? The angel of the Lord demanded. Look, I've come to block your way because you are stubbornly resisting me. 3 times the donkey saw me and shied away. Otherwise, I would have certainly killed you by now and spared the donkey. Then Balaam confessed to the angel of the Lord, I've sinned. I didn't realize you were standing in the road to block my way. I will return home if you are against my going. But the angel of the Lord told Balaam, go with these men, but say only what I tell you to say. So here we see Balaam really struggling with what to do here, and God using whatever means necessary to get through to him. I mean, he came to him in a vision and said, at the first night, and said, don't do it. But then Balaam says, well, maybe I'll have him come another night. And then finally, I think God realizes that this is the way that it has to be. And so he finally shows Balaam one more time, hey, I've got my armies right here. They could take you out, but I'm going to have you go to ultimately show some incredible things about how I will protect my people at any cost. We'll talk about that next week, but maybe your encouragement as you hear that story today is that you think about the signs that God has put in place where you are right now in your story. And if you're like me and you've blown by a whole bunch of signs thinking you could do it on your own, maybe this is a moment where you can say, God, I've tried doing it my way. Now I'll try yours. Now entering the Hall of Heroes, Felix Antoine Hamel. In the realm of Canadian democracy, Felix is an ordinary man with an extraordinary commitment to electoral reform. Called to action by the longest ballot committee, he joined 83 other candidates in a Toronto by-election, creating the longest ballot in Canadian history. But that's just the beginning of his story. As the election unfolded, Felix's unique position became clear. He received 0 votes, a historic first in Canadian contested federal elections. Embracing his fate with humor, he declared himself the true unity candidate, as everyone, including himself, agreed not to vote for him. The Library of Parliament confirmed his unprecedented achievement, marking a new chapter in electoral history. So because his story is a testament to the spirit of electoral reform, an inspiration to those who dare to challenge the ordinary and embrace the extraordinary, Felix Antoine Hamel is officially in the Manly with Andy Hall of Heroes. Biblical masculinity is needed now more than ever, and Brent Hansen has advice for young men. We'll continue looking at the story of Balaam in the Bible and how God uses evil for good. And 100 years ago, Caesar Cardini invented a dish still loved to this day, and it is plating him into the Hall of Heroes. Coming up next week on Manly with Andy. Manly with Andy is a Wow God production, a ministry of the University of Northwestern St. Paul. Discover more at wowgod.com.